In this example, I want to go ahead and take a look at Project 2 and just kind of go through a quick start with you. So I'm going to go ahead and call this p2QuickStart. And the idea is that the user interface is fairly straightforward. I'm going to have an input field that's going to capture the zip code. So ID equal to zip. Okay, so they enter the zip. And then I'm going to go ahead and have a button, type equal to button, ID equal to get weather. Okay, really straightforward user interface. I'm going to go ahead and save this in my web server's root directory as a new folder called p2, and I'm just going to leave it as p2, and then this file itself will be index.html. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and resize this a little bit. So I asked them to enter the zip code, and then I have this corresponding button that's going to go get the weather, and I have this GeoNames API up already. So if I go to localhost/p2, you can see my user interface. So the user types in a zip code, I click on the button, I should be able to go get the weather, and the get weather is actually a two-step process. The first step is I have to go, based on the zip code, determine the location, and by location I mean latitude and longitude coordinates. So that's one lookup, and that's what I actually have up here with the API. So I'm getting postal code search, and I've passed in my zip code in Verona, and based on that I get information. Mainly what I care about is I care about this latitude and longitude coordinates. So here's my longitude coordinate, here's my latitude coordinate. I want to pull those coordinates from my postal code data. Okay, so let's go ahead and wire up this button in a JavaScript file. So I'm going to have a script source, and I want to call this p2.js. So here's my new file, p2.js. And then in the onload event is where I'll wire up that button. So I'll have an init method. It's equal to some function definition. And that init method is going to get triggered in the window.onload event. And I want to wire up that button. So I'm going to have a reference to my weather button. So let weather button equal document.querySelector. We called it get weather. So there's a reference to my button. My weather button is going to have an event listener. So add event listener. And I'm going to listen for the click event. And I want a method called getLocation. Okay, so I'll have this constant, which is going to get my location. It's going to be equal to some function definition. And the first thing I'm going to have to do is I have to go get that zip code. So over here in my HTML, I have that text field. I want the user entered zip code. I want to send that over to my server. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm not going to do that. All I'm going to do is I'm going to hard code this URL. So all of the stuff that I have, I've hard coded. I hard coded the username, I hard coded the postal code, I hard coded the country code. All of that stuff is just embedded in the URL. For your project, you're going to obviously have to change that so that those are parameter values instead of just hard coded into the URL. And then I'm going to make an AJAX request. Okay, so I'm going to have a variable XHR. It's a new XML HTTP request. I know that I'm going to have to open that request via GET to a specific URL. I know that I'm going to have to send it with no parameters other than those that are embedded in the URL because we're doing an HTTP GET. And then I'm going to set up the callback. So the xhr.onReadyStateChange is going to equal some function definition. And then we're going to check if the XHR ready state is equal to 4. If it is equal to 4, then we're assuming that we get this JSON data back. Okay, so we're going to call this our data. Let data equal, we're going to parse it. So we're going to take the response text and parse it over to JSON. That's our data. And then the way this is set up is that we have an object that's going to have a property called postal codes. And inside the postal codes is a collection of data. So in our case, we only have one postal code, and we care about the latitude and longitude. Okay, so let's log those variables. So here's my latitude. I'm going to get that from the data. Postal codes at index 0, because we only have one postal code, and then we have the latitude. And then the same thing for the longitude. We want a different variable name, and then we're going to log that information. Lat and long. Okay, so now the idea is that if I inspect this in my console, no matter what's in the zip code, eventually I was hoping to get back my latitude and longitude. If I look at the network traffic, you can see that there is no network traffic. It looks my button event handler doesn't look like it's working. So window.onload, we trigger the init. We go get our weather button. The weather button has an event listener, click, and we call get location. So I'm not exactly sure why we're not sending. Everything looks saved. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a console.log, making sure that we're getting into this get location. Okay, so if I look at my console, when I click on the button, we're getting into get location. If I look at my network traffic, it looks like it's working now. I'm not sure what was happening before, but now you'll also notice that when I log the get location, I'm also getting the latitude and longitude coordinates. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so then the follow-up to this is, ideally, what I'd like to do is, okay, based on this location, I should be able to make a follow-up request to GeoNames and get my nearby weather. So if I go to api.geonames, there should be a get nearby weather. Where I pass in a latitude and longitude coordinate. Okay, and that's the method. I thought it was get nearby weather, and I could be wrong about that. Let's go out to Blackboard to check. So if I go into Blackboard and I'm looking at your course, and I'm looking at assignments, and I'm looking at your project, the first request is do your postal code search and get the JSON, and then there's a find nearby weather. So I was wrong. I think I was using get nearby weather. It's find nearby weather. And that's where I'd pass in my username equal to B. Witkowski, and then the latitude equal to 43 is close enough, and longitude equal to -89, which is close enough. And then you'll see that I get this weather observation. It tells me, you know, here's the temperature, here's the latitude, longitude, here's the wind speed, there's no wind. It tells me that the reading came from Watertown. Looks good to me. This is the weather observation. This is the weather data that I actually need. Okay, so the idea is that we get our location, and then based on the location, we then do a follow-up AJAX request where we use that location as parameters. We make a follow-up request to say, hey, based on this location, what's the current weather? So ideally, we'd have another method called getWeather that's going to take two parameters, lat and long, and then it's going to do something with those. And ideally, what it's going to do is it's going to make another AJAX request. Okay? So one thing we could do is our get location, I would like that to actually return a value and then to get the weather. So instead of getting the location when I click on the button, what if I went straight to get weather? Okay, and then instead of worrying about latitude and longitude being passed in, what if I assume that there are no coordinates getting passed in, and instead I want to get the latitude and longitude returned from me from this get location. So the idea here is that I would return some JSON object that includes the latitude and longitude. Okay, so I would get the location. So let location equal to get location. And then based on that, then I could make my AJAX request based on the location. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to log my location. Okay, so when we click on the button, we're going to go to the getWeather method. We try to go get our location. We already tested it. We know it works. We know that we're getting the latitude and longitude coordinates. And then we're going to log that location. Okay, so I go back over to my QuickStart. I refresh the page. I click on the getWeather. You can see I get undefined, and then I actually get the coordinates. This undefined is from line 8. And that's the method where I was trying to log the location. Okay, so now this is a little bit tricky with AJAX. I actually had it set up correctly the first time. And by that I mean I need to get the location, and then after I've gotten the location, then I can go get the weather. But I want to explain what's going on here because it's a common mistake. So what ends up happening here is I try to get the weather. This is where control is on line 6. I say go get the location. And the location, I'm going to execute all of this code sequentially. Line 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I set up an event handler for the onReady state change. I send the request, and my return value, right immediately after I send the request, I generate a return value which is undefined. Okay, so the return value from the getLocation function is undefined. I returned undefined, so location is undefined, and then I log it. After that, the event handler is already set up, and it's a global event handler, and the event handler doesn't go out of scope. And what happens is it eventually executes the event handler because the ready state eventually turns to 4. We log the latitude and longitude, and then we try to return this object that includes the latitude and longitude, and we're not returning it anywhere. It just is gone. Okay, and this is the problem with asynchronous processing. The calling method is not waiting on this return value. Okay, so I can't code it this way, and typically I'm not going to have return values from AJAX related functions unless I code this differently. So as we get further along, we're going to learn about promises, and promises will actually allow me to do this return. I can return a promise saying, hey, you either have the data or you don't. You can either resolve it or reject it. But with an XML HTTP request process, I typically don't have return values. Okay, so then what ends up happening is my getWeather, instead of trying to determine the location, I'm going to code this back the way it was. We're going to get the location. My getWeather is going to take 2 parameters, lat and long, and then I'm going to use that to make my next AJAX request to the find nearby weather. Okay, so I will then, instead of returning those values, I will call the getWeather method, passing in the latitude and longitude. And from there, I can kind of go to work and get the corresponding stuff that I need. Okay. So this is more of a preventative measure. We don't want to create functions that return values when our functions are making these XML HTTP requests. We're going to get stuck there. Okay. Instead, we're going to have nested callbacks. And nested callbacks are in themselves a problem, but as we go further along with our JavaScript, we're going to learn about promises that solves these nested callback problems that come up. Okay, so for the time being, this is just a quick start to get you started with the project to make sure that you're on the right path. If you have any questions, just let me know.